In the heart of the mightiest empire the world had yet known, beneath the shadow of colossal pyramids and sphinxes that gazed impassively at the centuries, the children of Israel languished in abject slavery. Egypt, a civilization built on the fertile banks of the life-giving Nile, was a land of dazzling wealth, esoteric knowledge, and divine pharaohs. Yet, for the Hebrews, it was a crucible of suffering. Generations had passed since their forefather Joseph, a man of wisdom and dreams, had saved this very land from famine. The memory of his deeds had faded, and a new dynasty, threatened by the sheer number of the Israelite people, had risen to power. Pharaoh, seeing them not as a community, but as a potential fifth column, a snake within his borders, decreed that their spirits must be broken. He subjected them to merciless forced labor, tasking them with building his great treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. Under the lash of cruel taskmasters and the searing African sun, they toiled in brickyards and fields, their bodies aching, their hopes dimming with each passing day. Yet, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, their resilience a silent testament to the promises made to their ancestors. This only fueled Pharaoh's paranoia. Enraged by their persistence, he issued a final horrific edict, a command born of cold political calculation and unspeakable cruelty. Every son born to the Hebrews was to be taken at birth and cast into the Nile. A profound darkness fell upon the slave quarters of Goshen as the river, the very source of Egypt's life and prosperity, was systematically turned into a watery grave for their innocent children. Into this world steeped in sanctioned death and pervasive grief, a child was born to Amram and Jochebed, a couple from the priestly tribe of Levi. He was a goodly child, perfect in form, his presence a light in their darkened home. For 3 agonizing months, they defied the king's genocidal decree. They hid him, smothering his infant cries, living in a constant state of heart-pounding terror. Every passing footstep of an Egyptian guard, every unexpected knock, sent a wave of icy fear through their veins. But a child's cry cannot be silenced forever. As he grew, the risk of discovery became too great. With a heart fractured by a mother's impossible choice, Jochebed devised a desperate plan, a final, fragile act of faith cast upon the waters. She skillfully wove a small ark of papyrus reeds, meticulously sealing every gap with bitumen and pitch to make it impervious to the river. With tears blurring her vision, she placed her precious son inside, wrapping him in cloths that carried the scent of her love. She carried this tiny, hopeful vessel to the river's edge and gently set it adrift among the thick reeds that lined the bank. A silent, desperate prayer entrusting his fate not to the random currents of the water, but to the providence of her unseen God. Her young daughter, Miriam, a girl with a wisdom and courage that belied her years, watched from a distance, a hidden and solitary guardian, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of fear and hope, as if guided by an unseen hand. The tiny ark floated near the very spot where Pharaoh's own daughter came down to the Nile to bathe with her handmaidens. Her eyes were drawn to the unusual sight of the basket nestled amongst the papyrus. Curiosity piqued, she sent her maidservant to retrieve it. As she opened the lid, the baby, now awake, began to weep. The sound, so pure and helpless, pierced the princess's heart. A wave of immediate and profound compassion washed over her, overwhelming the ingrained prejudices of her station. Though she instantly recognized him as one of the Hebrew children destined for death, she could not bring herself to be an agent of her father's brutal policy. At that pivotal moment, Miriam, sensing a shift in the currents of fate, bravely emerged from her hiding place. "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked, her voice trembling but clear. The princess, struck by the girl's boldness and seeing a practical solution, agreed. Miriam ran, her feet flying over the familiar ground, and returned with her own mother. In a miraculous and beautiful turn of events, Jochebed was hired to care for her own son, able to pour her love, her faith, and the stories of their people into him during his most formative years. When the child was weaned, he was brought, as promised, to Pharaoh's daughter, who formally adopted him as her son. She named him Moses for, as she declared, "Because I drew him out of the water." And so, in a paradox of divine irony, The child condemned to die by the river was saved by it, raised in the unparalleled splendor of the very palace that had sought his life, and educated in all the sophisticated wisdom, literature, and military arts of the Egyptians. Though Moses lived the life of a prince, adorned in the finest linen and bearing the privileges of his station, he was a man torn between two worlds. The lullabies his true mother had whispered to him, the stories of his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had taken root in his soul. He was acutely aware of his heritage and could not reconcile the luxury of his life with the brutal suffering of his kinsmen. As a grown man, he went out to the sprawling construction sites not just to inspect the work, but to truly see the affliction of his people. He watched them toil, their backs bent, their faces etched with despair. He witnessed a cruel Egyptian taskmaster mercilessly beating an elderly Hebrew slave who had faltered under his heavy load. A lifetime of suppressed identity, of righteous anger and deep-seated empathy boiled over in a single volcanic moment. He looked around. The other slaves averted their eyes. No overseers were in sight. In a flash of decisive action, Moses struck the Egyptian, killing him with a single blow. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rasping breaths of the rescued slave. Shock and fear immediately replaced his rage. Staring at the life he had just taken, Moses frantically dug a shallow grave in the hot sand and buried the body, concealing his crime. The next day he went out again and saw two Hebrews fighting. When he tried to intervene, one of them turned on him with a sneer. "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" The words struck Moses with the force of a physical blow. His secret was out. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped his heart. Soon, news of his deed reached the ears of Pharaoh, who, seeing this act not as justice but as rebellion, sought to have Moses executed. With his life forfeit, Moses fled Egypt, escaping alone into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. He journeyed east to the land of Midian, a fugitive prince stripped of his title, his wealth, his very identity. There, by a well, he found refuge with the family of Jethro, a priest of Midian, and eventually married his daughter, Zipporah. For 40 years, the prince became a shepherd. The silence of the desert, the rhythm of the seasons, and the simple life of tending flocks slowly stripped him of his Egyptian arrogance, forging in him a patience and humility he had never known. The destiny that awaited him seemed a distant, faded dream. One day, while leading his flock on the far side of the wilderness, Moses came to Horeb, the mountain of God, a stark and lonely peak rising from the desert floor. It was there, in the profound silence of that desolate place, that he witnessed a sight that shattered the very laws of nature. A single acacia bush was engulfed in a brilliant, fiery blaze, yet it was not consumed. The leaves, kissed by the ethereal flames, did not wither. The branches did not char and turn to ash. It simply burned, a living fire. As Moses turned to investigate this incredible and holy phenomenon, a voice called to him from within the fiery bush, a voice that was both terrifying in its power and yet deeply personal in its address. "Moses! Moses!" Overcome with a mixture of terror and awe, Moses instinctively replied, "Here I am." The voice commanded him to remove his sandals, for the very ground on which he stood was consecrated by the divine presence. It was the voice of the God of his ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The voice declared that he had seen the abject misery of his people in Egypt, that he had heard their cries of anguish under the whip of their taskmasters, and that he had now come to deliver them from their long night of bondage. He would bring them to a promised land, a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And he had chosen Moses, the long-forgotten shepherd, the self-exiled fugitive, to be his instrument of liberation. The divine commission struck Moses with the force of a thunderbolt. Who was he? A man of two worlds, belonging to neither. A murderer. A man whose own people had rejected his authority. He was overwhelmed with a profound sense of inadequacy. "Who am I?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "That I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt." God did not rebuke him, but offered a simple, all-encompassing promise. "I will be with you." Still riddled with doubt, Moses asked what name he should give to the people, for the name of a god held the essence of their power and character. "What shall I say to them?" he pleaded. God's reply from the heart of the fire was the most profound and central revelation of his mission, a statement that would echo through millennia. "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." To bolster Moses' wavering faith, God provided him with 3 miraculous signs. His shepherd's staff, when cast to the ground, became a living, hissing snake, and when grasped by the tail, returned to wood. His hand, when placed inside his cloak, became leprous, white as snow, and when returned, was instantly healed. And finally, water from the Nile would turn to blood when poured on the dry ground. Even with these potent assurances, Moses' deep-seated insecurity remained. "Pardon your servant, Lord," he protested. "I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue." God's patience began to wear thin. "Who gave human beings their mouths?" the voice thundered. But seeing Moses' genuine fear, he relented and appointed his brother Aaron, a man known to be well-spoken, to be his mouthpiece. And so, armed with the simple shepherd's staff that had become a conduit of divine power, and with his brother journeying to meet him, Moses set out on the long road back to the land he had fled, back to the heart of the empire, to confront the mightiest ruler on earth with a message from the King of all creation. The confrontation, when it came, was a titanic clash of wills, a spiritual battle waged in the opulent throne room of Egypt. Moses and Aaron, 2 weathered shepherds smelling of the wilderness, stood before the mighty Pharaoh, who, adorned in gold and precious stones, was considered a living god by his people. Through Aaron, Moses delivered God's audacious and unequivocal command. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, 'Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness.'" Pharaoh, the embodiment of earthly power and arrogance, leaned forward on his throne, a look of amused contempt on his face. "Who is the Lord," he scoffed, "that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." His heart was as hard as the granite statues that lined his halls. He not only refused, but in a punitive act of cruelty, he increased the Israelites' burdens, ordering them to make bricks without providing the necessary straw, forcing them to gather it themselves while maintaining their same daily quota. Their suffering intensified, and the people cried out, blaming Moses for their new hardship. Thus began the divine judgment, a systematic and terrifying series of 10 devastating plagues, each a calculated demonstration of God's supreme power and a direct, humiliating assault on the pantheon of Egyptian gods. The first plague turned the waters of the sacred Nile, the lifeblood of the empire and a deity in its own right, into blood. The river stank, the fish died, and the Egyptians could not drink from it. Yet Pharaoh's magicians, using their secret arts, replicated the feat on a smaller scale, and his heart remained unmoved. The second plague brought forth an unprecedented swarm of frogs from the river, covering the land and invading every corner of Egyptian life, from their palace beds to their baking ovens. Overwhelmed, Pharaoh pleaded with Moses to pray for their removal, promising to let the people go. But once the frogs were gone, he reneged on his word. Plagues of gnats, then swarms of biting flies, descended upon the Egyptians with maddening intensity. Yet the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was miraculously spared, a clear and ongoing sign of God's discriminating protection. Still, Pharaoh's heart grew harder. A terrible pestilence struck the livestock of the Egyptians, killing their cattle, horses, and donkeys in the fields, a direct blow to their economy and their gods of fertility. Then came painful, festering boils that broke out on man and beast alike, including Pharaoh's own magicians, who could no longer stand before Moses. A devastating hailstorm, unlike anything ever seen in Egypt, with fire flashing within the ice, rained down from the heavens, destroying crops and shattering everything left in the fields. A thick, devouring swarm of locusts consumed whatever the hail had left, turning the once verdant land into a barren wasteland. Then, a thick, palpable darkness, a darkness so profound it seemed to have physical weight, fell over Egypt for 3 torturous days. Egyptians were paralyzed in their homes, unable to see one another, while the Israelites had light in their dwellings. With each terrifying plague, the demand was repeated. And with each plague, Pharaoh's defiance grew, his heart sealing itself in an unbreakable shell of pride. The final plague was to be the most devastating and personal of all. God announced that at midnight on a designated day,
"The Lord God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us go, we pray thee, 3 days' journey into the desert."
a slave girl at her handmill. To protect the Israelites from this wave of death, God instituted a memorial that would define them forever: the Passover. Each Hebrew family was commanded to take a year-old male lamb without blemish, slaughter it, and mark the 2 doorposts and the lintel of their homes with its blood. That night, they were to roast the lamb and eat it in haste with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Their cloaks tucked in, their sandals on their feet, their staffs in hand, fully prepared to leave at a moment's notice. The blood would be a sign for the angel of death to pass over their homes, sparing the firstborn within. As midnight descended, an eerie silence fell, soon to be shattered. A great and terrible cry rose from the land of Egypt, a single unified wail of unbearable anguish and loss, as in every Egyptian home, the firstborn was struck down. This final, intimate blow shattered Pharaoh's pride and broke his will. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the dead of night and, his voice ragged with grief and fear, urged them to take their people and all their possessions and leave Egypt immediately. The Egyptian people, frantic and terrified, also pressed the Israelites to leave, lavishing them with articles of silver and gold, anything to hasten their departure. And so, after 430 years of bondage, the children of Israel, a vast multitude, walked out of Egypt. Not as fleeing slaves, but as a redeemed people, their long night of suffering finally over. Led by a magnificent and supernatural pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, a constant reminder of God's presence, the Israelites journeyed into the wilderness. But Pharaoh's change of heart was as fleeting as a desert mirage. Overcome with regret at the loss of his immense enslaved workforce, his grief hardened once more into rage. He mustered his army, the pinnacle of his military might, including 600 of his elite, swift chariots, and thundered in pursuit of the fleeing Israelites. He cornered them at the edge of the Red Sea, a vast, impassable body of water before them, a seemingly inescapable trap. As the dust cloud of the approaching Egyptian army appeared on the horizon, a wave of collective terror swept through the Israelite camp. They cried out to Moses, their faith vanishing in their fear, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" Moses, however, stood as a rock of unwavering faith amidst their tidal wave of panic. "Do not be afraid," he declared, his voice ringing with divine authority. "Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." At God's command, Moses stretched his staff out over the churning waters of the Red Sea. A powerful east wind began to howl, blowing all through the night. The sea itself obeyed. The waters parted, pulling back and rising up like 2 colossal liquid walls on their right and on their left, revealing a wide, dry path through the heart of the sea. In stunned, awestruck silence, the Israelites walked through the chasm on dry ground. As the last of them reached the other side, the Egyptian army, blinded by their arrogant pursuit, charged into the watery canyon. God threw their army into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove with difficulty. Then, at the break of dawn, Moses once again stretched out his hand over the sea. The walls of water collapsed, and the Red Sea returned to its full force, crashing down with thunderous power upon the Egyptians. The entire army of Pharaoh, with its chariots, its horsemen, and the pride of its empire, was swallowed by the tumultuous waves. When the Israelites saw the drowned bodies washed up on the shore, a profound and holy fear of the Lord filled them. They put their trust in him and in his servant Moses. And on that far shore, Miriam, Moses' sister, led the women in a song of triumphant praise for their miraculous and final deliverance. The journey that was meant to take weeks turned into a 40-year odyssey in the vast and unforgiving wilderness. This was not merely a journey from one place to another. It was the transformation of a slave-minded people into a holy nation. It was a time of immense testing and divine forging. When the people complained of hunger, God sent them manna from heaven, a mysterious bread-like substance that appeared each morning with the dew and in the evening sent quail on the wind. When they cried out in thirst, God commanded Moses to strike a rock at Horeb, and water gushed forth to quench the thirst of the entire nation. However, the wilderness was also a stage for their faithlessness. Their most grievous act of apostasy occurred at the foot of the sacred Mount Sinai. While Moses was on the mountain, shrouded in a terrifying cloud of smoke and fire, receiving the law directly from God, the people below grew impatient and fearful. They reverted to the familiar, tangible religion of their captors and persuaded a weak-willed Aaron to fashion for them a golden calf. They worshipped it with riotous celebration, proclaiming, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Moses descended from the mountain, his face shining with an otherworldly glow, carrying 2 stone tablets inscribed by the very finger of God, he saw the idolatrous scene below. His heart, filled with the glory of God, was shattered by the betrayal of his people. In a fury of righteous anger, he hurled the tablets to the ground, shattering them at the foot of the mountain, a stark and terrible symbol of their broken covenant. This act of profound rebellion had dire consequences. That entire generation that had witnessed the plagues and the parting of the sea, with the faithful exception of Joshua and Caleb, was condemned to wander in the wilderness until they had all died. It would be their children, a new generation forged in the discipline of the desert, who would inherit the promise. For 40 long years, Moses led the Israelites. He was their leader, their prophet, their judge, and their tireless intercessor before God. He bore the weight of their constant complaints, their rebellions, and their fears. He delivered to them the law, a comprehensive set of moral, civil, and ceremonial statutes that would define them as a nation. He oversaw the meticulous construction of the tabernacle, a portable and holy sanctuary where the very presence of God would dwell in their midst. But he too, in his humanity, was not without fault. Near the end of their wanderings at a place called Meribah, the people once again grumbled for water. God told Moses to speak to a rock to bring forth water, but Moses, his patience worn thin by a lifetime of their complaints, struck the rock twice in anger. For this single act of disobedience, of misrepresenting God's holiness before the people, he too was told that he would not be the one to lead the people into their final destination. As the 40 years drew to a close, the Israelites camped on the plains of Moab on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, looking across at the fertile hills of Canaan. Moses, now an old man of 120, his eyes still clear and his strength undiminished, gathered the new generation for his final words of instruction and encouragement. He recounted their history, restated the law, and in a solemn ceremony, appointed Joshua as his successor, a man filled with the spirit of wisdom. Then alone, Moses ascended Mount Nebo. From its peak, God showed him the vast panoramic expanse of the Promised Land in all its glory. He saw it all, the fulfillment of the ancient promise. Having seen the future of his people, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab. God himself buried him in a valley, and to this day no one knows the place of his burial. The children of Israel mourned for him for 30 days, weeping for the loss of the greatest prophet they would ever know, the man who had known God face to face. His epic life, from a baby in a basket to the liberator of a nation, remains a timeless and foundational story of faith, redemption, and the unwavering faithfulness of a God who hears the cries of the oppressed and brings them from the darkness of slavery into the glorious light of freedom.